I was staring at him when he threw my file onto the table like my 3 months of work meant absolutely nothing. Carson Maddox, my CEO, my boss, and maybe the man I'd secretly started falling for despite every warning my brain had been screaming at me. But today wasn't about feelings anymore. Today my heart shattered into pieces I knew I'd never be able to put back together. What is this garbage? Jordan? His voice cut through the conference room like ice. Those steel blue eyes looking at me as if I were a complete stranger who'd just walked in off the street. 3 months of effort, and you hand me this mediocre presentation. My hands were trembling under the table where no one could see them. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, to scream that I'd poured everything into that project. But with 15 other executives watching this public execution, I stayed silent. The only words that came out were, "I'll revise it, sir." Revise it? He let out a cold laugh that made my stomach twist. Jordan, you can't fix something that's fundamentally flawed. You never could get it right, could you? Something inside me cracked at that moment. Maybe it was my patience finally running out, or maybe it was the last thread of hope I'd been clinging to for 2 years. 2 years I'd spent in this company. 2 years I'd listened to Carson's criticism, swallowed every harsh word, endured every public humiliation because I thought stupidly, naively that one day he'd see me, really see me, not just as employee number 73, but as Jordan Carter, the person who stayed late when everyone else went home, who learned his coffee preferences, who actually cared about this company's success. But right now, standing in this glass-walled conference room with everyone's eyes on me, I finally understood the truth. I was just a number on his spreadsheet, a disappointing statistic he wished he could erase. I quit. The words left my mouth quietly, but the reaction was immediate. The room fell into shocked silence. Carson's eyes widened, and for half a second I saw something flicker across his face: surprise. Maybe even panic before the cold mask slammed back into place. "What did you just say?" His voice was dangerously low now. "I said I quit, Mr. Maddox." I stood up, gathering my laptop and notepad with hands that had stopped shaking because I'd finally found my anger, my strength. "I don't need this job anymore. And I definitely don't need you treating me like I'm worthless." I walked out of that conference room with my head held high, even though inside I felt like I was falling apart. Behind me I could hear the whispers starting, the gasps, someone saying my name. But I didn't look back. I went straight to my desk, grabbed my personal belongings, the photo of my mom, the small succulent plant that had somehow survived my terrible care, the coffee mug with a stupid motivational quote, and shoved them into my bag. Jordan. Wait. That was Marcus from accounting, trying to stop me. "Don't." I held up my hand. "Please. Just don't." The rain started as I stepped outside the building, fat droplets that quickly soaked through my shirt. I didn't care. I welcomed it, actually. Maybe it would wash away the humiliation, the heartbreak, the 2 years I'd wasted thinking Carson Maddox would ever see me as anything more than a disappointment. The bus ride home felt surreal. I watched the city blur past the rain-streaked windows, watched people rushing with umbrellas, watched life continuing like my world hadn't just imploded. My phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from coworkers, probably, but I ignored them all. What was there to say? That I'd finally grown a spine? That I'd walked away from the man I'd fallen for because staying would have destroyed what little self-respect I had left? By the time I reached my apartment building, the rain had turned into a downpour. I was completely drenched, my clothes clinging uncomfortably, hair dripping water into my eyes. I fumbled for my keys, already imagining the hot shower I was going to take, the pizza I was going to order, the job applications I'd start filling out tomorrow. But then I looked up, and he was there. Carson Maddox stood in front of my apartment door, soaked to the bone, his expensive suit ruined, his normally perfect hair plastered to his forehead. He was breathing hard like he'd been running, and when our eyes met, I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Pure, unfiltered desperation. "Jordan." His voice cracked on my name. "Wait. Please." I froze with my keys halfway to the lock. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This was Carson Maddox, the man who never showed emotion, who ran meetings with military precision, who I'd never seen break composure even once in 2 years. And now he was standing in the pouring rain outside my apartment, looking like his entire world depended on my next words. How did you? I started, but my voice came out rough. How did you even know where I live? Your employee file. He took a step closer and I saw water dripping from his chin, his eyelashes. I looked it up and drove here. Then I ran from the parking lot because I thought. He stopped, closing his eyes like he was in pain. I thought you might not answer if I called first. You're right. I wouldn't have. I should have felt satisfaction at seeing him like this, should have enjoyed watching him squirm. But all I felt was confused and angry and something else I didn't want to name. What are you doing here, Carson? Don't leave. The words burst out of him. Don't quit, don't walk away like this. Like what? I shot back. With dignity? With self-respect? You treated me like trash in front of everyone, Carson. You do it all the time and I'm done. I'm done being your punching bag. I know. He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking lost in a way I'd never imagined possible. I know I did, and Jordan, I can't let you go. I can't. You don't own me, I said, but my voice wavered because the way he was looking at me was making it hard to breathe. You were my boss. Past tense. You don't get to show up here and I'm not here as your boss. He cut me off. And suddenly he was right there, close enough that I could see the rain droplets on his skin, could feel the heat radiating off him despite the cold water. I'm here because the moment you walked out of that office, I realized I might have just lost the most important person in my life. The world seemed to stop. The rain, the traffic noise, everything faded except Carson's face and the raw emotion I could see there. What are you talking about? I whispered. Let me in, he said quietly. Let me explain. Let me tell you everything I should have said 2 years ago. I stood there with my keys still raised, water running down my face, trying to understand if this was real or if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate dimension. Carson Maddox, my former boss, was begging me to let him into my apartments, so he could explain something he should have told me 2 years ago. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was manipulation, that he was just trying to get me back because losing an employee made him look bad. But the way he was looking at me like I was the only solid thing in a world that had started crumbling, that didn't feel like manipulation. You have 5 minutes, I finally said, unlocking the door. Then you leave. He nodded quickly, following me inside. I didn't turn on the main lights, just the small lamp in the corner that cast everything in warm shadows. We stood in my tiny living room, both dripping water onto the hardwood floor, and I realized I'd never felt more exposed. This was my space, my sanctuary, and having Carson here felt like letting a storm into my shelter. Start talking, I said, crossing my arms. You said you needed to explain. Carson looked around my apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture, the books stacked on every surface, the art prints I'd collected from street vendors. I saw something soften in his expression, like he was seeing a piece of me he'd never known existed. I've been lying to myself for 2 years, he began, his voice rough. Every single day I told myself that being harsh with you was professional, that pushing you harder than anyone else was because I saw potential, that keeping distance was necessary for workplace boundaries. That's your explanation? I felt anger flaring again. That you were hard on me for my own good? That's the oldest excuse in the— It was because I was terrified, he interrupted, and the raw honesty in his voice stopped me cold. Jordan, from the day you started working at Maddox Industries, you've been the only thing that could break through my walls. Do you know what that's like for someone like me? Someone like you? I repeated. You mean someone who's rich, powerful, and can do whatever he wants? Someone who's had every day of his life planned out since birth. He moved closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The vulnerability. My father decided I'd take over the company when I was 12. My mother arranged my first business meeting before I graduated high school. I was engaged to a senator's daughter when I was 23, a marriage that was about mergers, not love. I blinked. You were engaged? I called it off 6 months before the wedding. It was the first time I'd ever gone against my family's wishes, and they nearly disowned me. He laughed bitterly. I realized I couldn't sap my life living for everyone else's expectations, so I threw myself into work, kept everything professional and cold because that was safe. Feelings couldn't complicate things if I never let anyone close. My arms loosened slightly. Then I showed up. Then you showed up, he confirmed, and the way he said it made my breath catch. With your terrible coffee jokes and your habit of humming while you organized files, you'd leave sticky notes on my desk with meeting reminders, and somehow you always knew when I'd skipped lunch. You cared, Jordan, not about my last name or my bank account, but about me. And that scared me more than anything in my life. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Carson I knew, the cold, distant CEO who barely acknowledged my existence outside of work criticisms. This was someone raw and real and struggling. So you decided to push me away, I said slowly. Understanding dawning. By being cruel. I thought if I could make you hate me, if I could convince myself you were just another mediocre employee, then these feelings would disappear. He stepped closer again, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with rain. But they didn't. They got stronger. Every time you smiled, despite my coldness. Every time you stayed late to help even when I didn't ask. Every time you looked at me like I was worth something beyond my title, I fell harder. Carson, when you quit today, when you looked at me with those eyes full of hurt and walked out, something inside me snapped. His voice cracked. I sat in that conference room after everyone left, staring at your empty chair, and I couldn't breathe. I thought about tomorrow without seeing you at your desk, about next week without your voice in meetings, about next month, next year, the rest of my life without you in it. And I realized I'd rather lose everything, my position, my family's approval, every professional boundary, than lose you. Tears were burning behind my eyes. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I know. He looked like those words physically hurt him. I know, and I will never forgive myself for that. I was trying so hard to maintain the facade, to pretend you didn't matter. I destroyed the one real thing in my life. Jordan, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I need you to know that every harsh word was me fighting myself, not you. Why now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why tell me all this now after 2 years? Because losing you made me realize that I'd already lost myself. He reached out slowly, giving me time to move away, and gently touched my face. His fingers were cold from the rain, but his touch felt like fire. I've spent my whole life being what everyone expected. The perfect son, the ruthless CEO, the emotionless businessman. But with you I wanted to be something different, someone real. I should have stepped back, should have told him to leave. But instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my eyes closing as 2 years of longing crashed over me. This is crazy, I murmured. You're my boss. We're my boss. This violates every professional. I don't care. His other hand came up to cup my face, and when I opened my eyes, his were intense and focused entirely on me. I don't care about professional boundaries or company policy, or what anyone thinks. I care about you, Jordan Carter. I care about the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I care about your terrible taste in motivational quotes. I care about how you see good in people even when they don't deserve it. I care about you in a way that terrifies me because I've never felt this for anyone. What are you saying? My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own words. I'm saying I'm in love with you, Carson said, and the world stopped spinning. I'm completely, irrevocably in love with you, and I'm begging you for one chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve. His words hung in the air between us, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Carson Maddox, the man who'd made me want to scream in frustration more times than I could count, who'd simultaneously been my dream and my nightmare for 2 years, had just said he loved me. Not liked, not was attracted to, but loved. The word felt too big for my small apartment, too real for this moment that still felt like a fever dream. You need to dry off, I heard myself say, which was possibly the most ridiculous response to a love confession in history. But my brain had short-circuited, and practical concerns were the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. Carson blinked, clearly not expecting that reaction, then looked down at himself. We were both still soaking wet, leaving puddles on my floor. A laugh escaped him, a real, genuine laugh I'd never heard before, and the sound transformed his entire face. You're right, he said, but he didn't move away. Though I should probably go. I've said what I came to say, and you need time to process. I just needed you to know the truth before. Stay. The word left my mouth before I'd fully thought it through. I mean, you can't drive like this. You'll get pneumonia or crash your car or something. Something hopeful flickered in his eyes. Are you sure? No, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But I nodded anyway. I'll get you a towel. And maybe some dry clothes. Though I don't know if anything I own will fit you. I escaped to my bedroom, leaning against the closed door for a moment to catch my breath. This was insane. Carson Maddox was in my living room, had just confessed his love, and I'd invited him to stay. I grabbed the biggest towel I owned and found an old university hoodie and sweatpants that might work, even if they'd be tight on his broader frame. When I returned, he'd taken off his suit jacket and was wringing water from it over my kitchen sink. The sight of him doing something so domestic in my space made my chest tight. Here, I handed him the towel and clothes. Bathroom's down the hall. I'll make coffee. He took them, our fingers brushing, and electricity shot up my arm. Thank you, Jordan. While he changed, I busied myself with the coffee maker, grateful for something to do with my shaking hands. The rain continued drumming against my windows, creating a cocoon of sound that made everything feel separate from the real world. Maybe that's what I needed, to pretend this was happening in some alternate universe where CEOs fell in love with their assistants and everything worked out perfectly. But life wasn't a fairy tale. There were consequences to consider, complications that went beyond just our feelings. That smells incredible. Carson's voice made me jump. I turned to find him in my too small clothes, hair still damp but no longer dripping, looking more human than I'd ever seen him. The expensive armor of his suits was gone, leaving just a man who seemed uncertain and vulnerable. It's just coffee, I said, pouring 2 mugs. Nothing fancy. Everything you do is fancy to me. He accepted the mug, wrapping both hands around it. Can we talk? Really talk? Without me standing in your doorway like a dramatic idiot? Despite everything, I smiled. You did look pretty dramatic. We sat on my worn couch, careful to maintain space between us. And for a long moment, we just drank our coffee in silence. The rain and the warmth of the drink started to thaw the cold that had settled into my bones. I need you to understand something, I finally said. For 2 years, I watched you from across that office. I learned your routines, your preferences, the tiny tells you have when you're stressed or satisfied with a deal. I told myself it was just about being a good assistant. But I was lying. Carson set down his mug, giving me his full attention. I had feelings for you, I continued, forcing myself to be as honest as he'd been. Real, complicated, painful feelings. And every time you criticized me, every harsh word, it felt personal to me. You weren't just my boss, disappointing me. You were the man I'd fallen for, treating me like I was worthless. Jordan, let me finish. I took a shaky breath. Today, when I quit, it wasn't just about that presentation or that moment. It was about protecting myself. Because I knew if I stayed watching you every day while you treated me like nothing, it would destroy me. So I chose myself. And you should have, he said quietly. You absolutely should have chosen yourself. I was toxic, Jordan. I was so caught up in my own fear and denial that I hurt the one person I wanted to protect. So where does that leave us? I asked. You can't just confess your feelings and expect everything to be perfect. There are real problems here, Carson. Your company has a fraternization policy. Your father already controls your life. What happens when he finds out about us? And that's assuming there even is an us. Because I haven't said how I feel yet. He nodded slowly. You're right. About all of it. So let me address each concern. He shifted to face me fully. First, the company policy. If you come back and that's entirely your choice, I'll recuse myself from being your direct supervisor. We'll establish clear professional boundaries that protect both of us. And your father? My father doesn't control my life anymore, Carson said firmly. I let him for too long because it was easier than fighting. But I'm done. If he has a problem with who I love, he can find a new CEO. My heart stuttered at his use of present tense. You'd really give up the company? For you? Without hesitation. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Jordan, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I could walk away tomorrow and be fine. But I couldn't walk away from you. Not now that I've finally been honest about what you mean to me. I set down my own mug with trembling hands. You really mean all this? This isn't just guilt or impulse or... This is 2 years of denying what I felt every time you walked into my office. He reached out slowly, taking my hand. 2 years of pretending I didn't notice when you changed your hair or wore that blue shirt I liked. 2 years of forcing myself not to smile when you made those terrible puns. 2 years of being in love with you and hating myself for it. Why did you hate yourself for it? I whispered. Because I thought love was weakness. My parents married for business. My siblings all have strategic relationships. I was taught that feelings compromise judgments, that attachment makes you vulnerable. He brought my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles gently. But you know what I learned today? Being without you is the real weakness. Pushing away the best thing in my life because I was scared, that's what compromised my judgments. Tears finally spilled down my cheeks. I'm still scared. So am I, he admitted. Terrified, actually. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. I looked at our joined hands, at this man who'd somehow become everything despite my best efforts to hate him, and made my decision. Okay? His eyes widened with hope. Okay, we can try this. Slowly, carefully, with boundaries and honesty. I squeezed his hand. But Carson, if you hurt me again, I won't. He pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around me. I swear on everything I have I won't. And sitting there in my small apartment with rain falling outside and Carson's heartbeat steady against my ear, I finally let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. The next morning I stood outside Maddox Industries with my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd made the decision to return, but on completely different terms this time. Carson and I had talked until 3 a.m, establishing boundaries and discussing how we'd navigate this impossible situation. He'd promised transparency, honesty, and that he'd handle any fallout that came our way. But promises made in the quiet intimacy of my apartment felt different in the harsh light of day, standing before the gleaming glass tower where I'd spent 2 years being invisible. My phone buzzed. Carson, I'm already inside. Emergency meeting in 10 minutes. Trust me? I typed back, trying to. The lobby felt different as I walked through it. Or maybe I was different. I wasn't sneaking in hoping to avoid notice anymore. I was walking in as someone who mattered, who had value beyond my employee ID number. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, the usual morning chaos of the office had been replaced by an eerie silence. People were gathered in small clusters, whispering, and when they saw me, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Jordan's back, someone muttered. I heard he quit yesterday, another voice added. Did Carson convince him to return? I kept my head high and walked past them all, heading straight for the conference room. My former desk, would it be my desk again? Still had my nameplate on it. Someone had watered my succulent plants. The small kindness made my throat tight. The conference room was already filling up. Marcus from accounting gave me a supportive nod. Jennifer from marketing looked curious. But most faces showed confusion and speculation. They all knew something significant was happening. They just didn't know. Then Carson entered, and the room fell completely silent. He looked like the CEO everyone knew, perfectly tailored navy suit, hair styled impeccably, commanding presence that demanded attention. But when his eyes found mine across the room, they softened in a way that was just for me. That private moment in a room full of people felt more intimate than anything we'd shared the night before. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Carson began, standing at the head of the table. His voice was steady, professional, but I could see his hand flexing slightly at his side. A nervous tell I'd learned to recognize. I have an important announcement regarding personnel changes and company policy. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Effective immediately, Jordan Carter will be returning to Maddox Industries. However, there will be structural changes to reporting lines to ensure proper oversight and eliminate any conflicts of interest. He paused, and I saw him take a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Jordan and I are in a romantic relationship. You could have heard a pin drop. Then the room erupted, not in sound but in visible shock. Mouths fell open, eyes went wide. I saw Jennifer grip the table like she might fall over. I understand this is unexpected, Carson continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. And I want to be completely transparent about how we're handling this situation. Jordan will be reporting directly to Vice President Morrison more than to me. We will maintain professional boundaries during work hours, and this relationship will not impact employment decisions, promotions, or company operations in any way. But someone started to speak. If anyone has concerns about favoritism or impropriety, there will be an independent HR review process available, Carson said firmly. Jordan earned his position here through skill and dedication, not through our personal relationship. In fact, our relationship began after he quit yesterday, so there was no overlap of romantic involvement during his employment under my supervision. That was technically true, even if the feelings had existed long before. What I will not tolerate, Carson's voice took on an edge I recognized, is any form of discrimination or harassment directed at Jordan or anyone else based on their personal relationships. This company has always prided itself on progressive values, and that starts with leadership setting an example. The meeting ended shortly after, with people filing out in a daze. Some were supportive. Marcus came up immediately to shake my hand and say congratulations. Others were clearly processing, their faces showing skepticism or concern, and a few avoided eye contact entirely, which told me all I needed to know about their opinions. But one person stayed behind as the room cleared. Lily Monroe, our head of human resources. She was in her mid-40s, known for being fair but firm, and her expression now was carefully neutral. Jordan, could we speak privately in my office? My stomach dropped, but I nodded. Carson caught my eye, silently asking if I wanted him there, but I shook my head slightly. This was something I needed to handle myself. Lily's office was neat and organized, with family photos on her desk and employee rights posters on the walls. She gestured for me to sit and closed the door before taking her own seat. I want to start by saying that I support workplace diversity and personal freedom, she began, which immediately made me nervous, because sentences that started that way rarely ended well. However, I have some concerns I need voice, not as an obstacle but as someone who wants to protect you. Protect me from what? I asked. From the reality of corporate politics. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Jordan, you seem like a good person and Carson clearly cares about you, but you need to understand what you're walking into. The board of directors is extremely conservative. Several members have openly opposed LGBTQ-friendly policies, and Carson's father, Dominic Maddox Sr., still holds significant influence over company decisions, despite his semi-retirement. My hands clenched in my lap. Carson said he could handle his father. I'm sure he believes that, Lily said gently. But Dominic Maddox didn't build a billion-dollar empire by being easy to handle. If he decides your relationship is bad for business or family reputation, he will find ways to apply pressure. And that pressure might not be directed at Carson. It might be directed at you. What do you mean? I mean that it's much easier to remove an executive assistant than a CEO, even if that CEO is willing to fight for you. She pulled out a folder. I'm not saying this to scare you but to prepare you. I've documented today's meeting and Carson's public statement. If there's ever any retaliation or discrimination, you'll have official records to back you up. But Jordan, be careful. Watch your back. And don't let love blind you to the very real professional risks you're taking. I left her office feeling like I'd been doused with cold water. The morning's confidence had evaporated, replaced by creeping anxiety. Was I being naive? Was Carson's optimism about handling his father just wishful thinking? I was walking back toward my desk, my new desk in a different section, away from Carson's office, when I felt someone behind me. Hey, Carson's voice was low, meant only for me. I saw you come out of Lily's office. Everything okay? I turned to face him, aware that people were watching us even as they pretended not to. She warned me about your father, about the board, about all the ways this could go wrong. Something flickered across Carson's face, not surprise but acknowledgement. She's not wrong to be concerned. Are you saying we made a mistake? My voice came out smaller than I intended. No. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the determination in his eyes. I'm saying we're going to face challenges. But Jordan, I meant what I said last night. I'm not backing down, and I'm not letting you face this alone. Whatever comes, we handle it together. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But Lily's words echoed in my mind. Don't let love blind you to the risks. Your father's going to hear about this, I said quietly. Probably already has, Carson replied. The board meets next week. I'm expecting him to show up. And then what? Then I stand my ground. He glanced around, then lowered his voice even more. Meet me for lunch? Off-site. We can talk about strategy. I nodded and he walked away, maintaining professional distance now that we'd been seen talking. I sat at my new desk, trying to focus on emails and project updates, but my mind was racing with possibilities. Most of them bad. 3 hours later my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood run cold. Dominic Maddox. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hello, Mr. Carter. His voice was deep, commanding, with an accent that spoke of old money and older power. I believe we need to have a conversation. My office. 4 o'clock today. Come alone. He hung up before I could respond. I sat frozen at my desk, phone still pressed to my ear even though the line had gone dead. Dominic Maddox Sr. had summoned me. Not requested a meeting, not asked if I was available, summoned like I was a servant being called before a king. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. It was only 11:30. I had 4.5 hours to prepare for a meeting that could destroy everything Carson and I were trying to build. Should I tell Carson? He was in back-to-back meetings until 3, according to his calendar. But this felt like something I shouldn't handle alone. Despite Dominic's instruction to come without company, I pulled up Carson's number, my thumb hovering over the call button. Then I stopped. This was a test. Dominic wanted to see if I would run to his son for protection, if I was someone who needed Carson to fight my battles. If I showed up to that meeting with Carson in tow, I'd be proving every negative assumption Dominic had about me. That I was weak, that I was using Carson, that I wasn't worthy of being taken seriously. But if I went alone, faced whatever Dominic threw at me with my own strength and conviction, maybe, just maybe, I could earn a fraction of respect. I spent my lunch break researching Dominic Maddox Sr. Everything I could find, interviews, business decisions, his history with the company. He was a man who valued strength, results, and legacy above all else. He'd built Maddox Industries from a small trading company into a multinational corporation through ruthless efficiency and strategic brilliance. He'd also been married 3 times, each marriage clearly transactional. His children from various marriages were scattered across the business world, most of them in positions he'd arranged. Carson was the exception, the one who'd broken an engagement and refused a predetermined path. At 3:45, I stood outside the executive wing where Dominic kept an office despite his semi-retirement. The door was imposing mahogany with a brass nameplate that had been there for 30 years. I knocked. Enter. The office was exactly what I expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with awards and photos of Dominic with presidents, CEOs, celebrities. Behind a massive desk sat the man himself. Dominic Maddox Sr. was in his late 60s, but looked a decade younger. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the same blue eyes Carson had inherited. But where Carson's eyes could show warmth, Dominic's were ice. Sit. He didn't look up from the document he was reading. I sat in the chair across from his desk, keeping my spine straight and my expression neutral. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. A full minute passed in silence. Power play, I realized. Making me wait, making me uncomfortable. Establishing dominance before a word was even spoken. Finally he set down his papers and looked at me directly. Jordan Carter, 26 years old. State University graduate. No family connections, no inherited wealth, no remarkable credentials beyond a decent work ethic. He rattled off facts like he was reading a grocery list. And somehow you've managed to entangle yourself with my son. I wouldn't call it entanglement. I started. I didn't ask you to speak yet. His voice didn't rise, but the command in it was absolute. I've had you investigated, Mr. Carter. Thoroughly. Your finances, your marger, your social media history, your previous relationships. Do you know what I found? My stomach churned, but I kept my face still. I imagine you're about to tell me. Nothing. He leaned back in his chair. No scandals, no debts beyond reasonable student loans, no criminal history, not even a parking ticket. You're remarkably ordinary. The words stung more than I expected. Is that a crime? It's suspicious. He steepled his fingers. In my experience, People who appear too clean are usually hiding something. But let's assume for a moment that you're genuinely just an average person who happened to catch my son's attention. That presents a different problem, which is that you're completely unprepared for what being associated with this family means. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Carson thinks love conquers all. He's idealistic that way, probably his mother's influence. But you and I, Mr. Carter, we're realists, so let me paint you a realistic picture. I stayed silent, waiting. If you continue this relationship, you will be scrutinized by media, by business competitors, by everyone who wants leverage over my son or this company. Your past will be examined under a microscope. Your every action will be judged and criticized. You will attend events where people smile to your face while calculating how to use you for their advantage. He turned back to face me. Can you handle that? Can you stand next to Carson at a charity gala while board members whisper about the assistant who slept his way to the top? Can you watch him defend you repeatedly, knowing each defense costs him political capital he needs to run this company? Each word hit like a physical blow because they were all things I'd already feared in my darkest moments. I didn't ask for any of this, I said quietly. I quit, remember? I walked away because I knew staying would be complicated. And yet here you are, back again. Dominic moved closer, looming over me, which tells me either you're incredibly naive about the consequences, or you're gambling that Carson's feelings will protect you from reality. Neither option inspires confidence. I stood up, refusing to let him tower over me anymore. With respect, Mr. Maddox, you don't know anything about what Carson and I have discussed or planned. You don't know what boundaries we've set or how we're handling this professionally. Then enlighten me. Carson and I have established separate reporting structures. I'm not in his chain of command anymore. We're documenting everything to ensure transparency, and we're aware, very aware of the challenges we're facing. I met his eyes steadily, but what we're not willing to do is hide or pretend we don't care about each other to make other people comfortable. Something flickered across Dominic's face. Not approval, but something else. Reassessment. Maybe you have more spine than I expected, he admitted. But spine alone won't be enough when the board votes on Carson's position next quarter. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? You think Carson's position as CEO is guaranteed? He's been on thin ice since he broke his engagement 3 years ago. The board tolerated it because he delivered results. But this, he gestured vaguely at May. This will be seen as another poor judgment call. They'll question his priorities, his stability, his ability to put the company first. You could defend him, I said, understanding dawning. You still have influence. You could tell the board this doesn't affect his work. I could. Dominic walked back to his desk, pulling out a folder. Or you could make this easier for everyone. He slid the folder across to me. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a contract, a generous severance package, a glowing recommendation letter, and a significant cash payment. Easily 6 figures in exchange for my resignation and a non-disclosure agreement about my relationship with Carson. You're trying to buy me off? I said, my voice hollow. I'm offering you a dignified exit from an untenable situation. He sat back down. Take the money, Mr. Carter. Start fresh somewhere else. Let Carson focus on securing his position here. If you truly care about him, you'll see this is the best option for his future. I stared at the contract, at the amount of money that would change my life, at the easy escape from all the complications and pain I knew were coming. Then I closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. No. Dominic's eyebrows rose. That's $250,000 you're refusing. I know. I stood up, and I'm still saying no, because Carson isn't yours to control anymore, and I'm not for sale. If the board wants to remove him, they'll have to do it knowing he accomplished everything you asked of him and more. His personal life shouldn't matter. But it does matter. That's the reality of leadership. Then maybe it's time for that reality to change. I moved toward the door. Was there anything else, Mr. Maddox? For a long moment he just looked at me. Then he said, I'll give Carson 1 month to prove this won't impact company performance. The quarterly earnings report is due in 4 weeks. If stock prices drop, or if there's any negative press that affects our business relationships, I'll make sure the board removes him. And Mr. Carter? His voice stopped me at the door. If that happens, You'll have to live with knowing you cost him everything he's worked for. I left his office feeling like I'd been through a war. My legs were shaky, my heart racing, and doubt was creeping in like poison. Had I just made a terrible mistake? Should I have taken the money and left, saved Carson from this impossible situation? I was so lost in thought I didn't see Carson until I nearly ran into him in the hallway. Jordan. His face was tight with worry. I heard you met with my father. Why didn't you tell me he called? Because I needed to handle it myself. I realized how exhausted I sounded. He offered me money to leave you. Carson's expression darkened into something dangerous. He did what? $250,000 and a severance package. I turned it down. I met his eyes. But Carson, there's something you need to know. The board meeting next quarter. Your father says they might vote to remove you as CEO because of us. The color drained from Carson's face. Not because he was scared, I realized, but because he was furious. Then we have a month to make sure that doesn't happen, he said grimly. Whatever it takes. The next 4 weeks were the most intense of my entire life. Carson threw himself into work with a dedication that bordered on obsession. He renegotiated 3 major contracts, secured 2 new international clients, and personally oversaw a product launch that generated unprecedented buzz. The man barely slept, barely ate, and was running on pure determination and what felt like gallons of coffee. And I was right there with him every step of the way. True to our agreement, I reported to Vice President Morrison, but my actual work often intersected with Carson's projects. I found myself pulling equally brutal hours, supporting presentations, managing communications, coordinating between departments. Together we were a machine, efficient, effective, and utterly exhausted. The office had settled into a wary acceptance of our relationship. Some people were genuinely supportive. Marcus started bringing me coffee in the mornings, and Jennifer asked insightful questions about work-life balance when dating your CEO. But others kept their distance, and I could feel their judgment in every meeting, every interaction. The board meeting loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. The stock prices are up 12%, Carson told me one night as we reviewed numbers in his apartment. We'd started alternating between his place and mine, though his had better space for spreading out documents. That's good, but my father mentioned 15% as the target. We still have 5 days, I said, though I wasn't sure if 5 days or 5 months would be enough to satisfy Dominic Maddox. Carson rubbed his eyes, and I noticed the dark circles that had taken up permanent residence there. I'm going to get those numbers up. I have to. Carson. I moved around the coffee table to sit next to him. You've done everything possible and more. If the board can't see your value after all this, then maybe. Don't. He cut me off. Don't say maybe I should step down. This company is my life's work. And what about your actual life? I asked softly. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours? When did you last eat a real meal instead of protein bars at your desk? You're going to burn out. I'll rest after the meeting. He tried to turn back to his laptop, but I gently closed it. No, you'll rest now. Come on. I stood up and held out my hand. Bedroom. Sleep. That's an order from someone who actually cares about you more than stock prices. For a moment I thought he'd argue. Then his shoulders sagged and he took my hand. Just for a few hours, we lay down fully clothed on top of his covers, and within minutes, Carson was asleep with his head on my chest. I ran my fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of everything we were risking pressing down on me. Was I being selfish? Dominic's words kept echoing. If you truly care about him, you'll let him focus on his career. But how was watching Carson destroy himself with stress and overwork caring for him? The morning of the board meeting arrived with gray skies and a forecast of thunderstorms, fitting for the mood. Carson was already up and dressed when I woke. His suit immaculate, his expression determined but tight. Ready? I asked. As I'll ever be. He adjusted his tie in the mirror. Jordan, whatever happens today, don't. Now it was my turn to cut him off. Don't say goodbye. Don't prepare me for the worst. Just go in there and show them why you're the best CEO this company has ever had. He kissed me then, deeply and desperately, like he was trying to memorize the feeling. Then he left for the office, heading to a meeting I wasn't allowed to attend. I tried to work from my desk, but concentration was impossible. Every minute felt like an hour. Marcus walked by 3 times, offering support. Jennifer sent an encouraging email. Even Lily stopped by to say she'd prepared documentation of every policy we'd followed correctly, just in case. 3 hours after the meeting started, my phone buzzed. "Carson, come to conference room B. Now." My heart stopped. That wasn't his father's office or the main boardroom. Conference room B was neutral territory. What did that mean? I practically ran through the hallways, not caring who saw my panic. When I burst through the conference room door, I found Carson standing by the window and Dominic seated at the table. "Mr. Carter." Dominic greeted me with unreadable expression. "Punctual. That's good. What's going on?" I looked between them. "The board meeting is finished," Carson said, turning to face me. His expression was complicated, not quite happy, not quite sad. The vote was 7-4 in favor of keeping me as CEO. Relief flooded through me. "That's incredible. That's with conditions," Dominic interrupted. "The board wants quarterly reviews of company performance for the next year. Any significant decline in profitability or negative press that impacts business relationships will trigger another vote. Essentially, my son is on probation." The relief curdled into something heavier. "Because of our relationship, because of concerns about judgment and priorities," Dominic corrected. "Though yes, your relationship is central to those concerns." I looked at Carson, seeing the tension in his jaw. "What does this mean for us?" "It means we have to be perfect," Carson said quietly. "No mistakes, no scandals, nothing that can be used against us." "That's not sustainable," I protested. "Nobody can be perfect all the time." "Then I suggest you both learn quickly," Dominic said, standing up. "Because the board wasn't the only vote that mattered today." "Carson, tell him." Carson's expression shifted to something harder to read. "The vote was close because 3 board members abstained. They abstained because my father convinced them to." I turned to Dominic, stunned. "You helped us?" "I helped my son," he corrected firmly. "Don't mistake this for approval of your relationship, Mr. Carter. I still believe you're a distraction and a liability. However, I've watched you both bury yourselves half to death these past 4 weeks. I've reviewed the contracts Carson secured, the growth he achieved, and I've noted that many of those successes involved your direct contribution." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You're not what I would have chosen for my son, but he clearly believes you're worth fighting for, and I've never known Carson to be wrong about business decisions. Perhaps I should extend him the same trust in personal ones." It wasn't exactly a blessing, but it wasn't a curse either. Coming from Dominic Maddox, it might have been as close to acceptance as we'd ever get. After he left, Carson and I stood in silence for a long moment. "We did it," I finally said. "You kept your position." "We did it," he corrected, pulling me close. "Jordan, I know this isn't the fairy tale ending you might have hoped for. We're still going to face scrutiny and pressure. The next year is going to be difficult." "I know." I wrapped my arms around him. "But we'll face it together, right? That's what you promised." "That's what I promised," he confirmed. Then he pulled back to look at me seriously. "I need you to understand something. If there comes a point where this becomes too much, where the pressure or the publicity or the judgment is hurting you, I need you to tell me. I won't trap you in this situation just because I'm stubborn about keeping what's mine. I'm not yours to keep," I said gently. "I'm yours to stand beside." There's a difference. Something in his expression softened completely. "How did I get so lucky?" "You didn't. You just finally stopped being stupid long enough to see what was right in front of you." I smiled. "Now can we please go celebrate? Maybe with actual food and sleep?" He laughed, a real genuine laugh that transformed his whole face. "There's a restaurant I've been wanting to take you to. Someplace nice where we can actually be ourselves." That evening, sitting across from Carson at a small Italian restaurant far from the corporate world, watching him finally relax for the first time in weeks, I understood something important. This wasn't a perfect solution. We hadn't defeated every obstacle or won over every critic. We were still going to face challenges and judgments and moments of doubt. But we'd survived the storm. We'd stood our ground when it would have been easier to give up. And more importantly, we'd done it together. Carson reached across the table to take my hand. "Thank you." "For what?" for not taking my father's money, for believing in us enough to stay. His thumb traced circles on my palm. For being stubborn enough to fight for someone who didn't deserve you. You do deserve me, I said firmly, and I deserve you. Imperfect, complicated, difficult as this is. I wouldn't change it. Not even the part where I was a complete jerk for 2 years. Especially not that part. It makes this victory so much sweeter. We talked late into the evening about everything except work. Our hopes, our fears, the life we wanted to build together beyond office walls and board meetings. For the first time since this wild journey began, I felt genuinely optimistic about our future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. We'd have to prove ourselves over and over, maintain impossible standards, and face continued skepticism from people who thought our relationship was inappropriate or unprofessional. But we'd already survived the impossible. We'd faced down Dominic Maddox, convinced a skeptical board, and transformed from boss and employee into genuine partners. Whatever came next, we'd handle it the same way we'd handled everything else. Together, stubborn and absolutely refusing to let anyone else define what our relationship could be. Because this wasn't just an office romance that had beaten the odds. This was two people who'd chosen each other despite every logical reason not to. Who'd fought for something real in a world that valued appearances and strategy over authentic connection. And somehow, impossibly, we'd won.